I didn't plan to end my engagement on a Saturday night in September. I planned to give the woman I loved her parents back as a wedding gift. That was the whole idea. Something generous. The kind of gesture my father would have made. The kind that cost you nothing except the courage to drive somewhere unfamiliar and knock on a door you have no guarantee will open for you. What I found behind that door changed everything. And what I did with it afterward took every ounce of patience I have ever developed sitting across negotiating tables from men twice my age who believed they had all the leverage. My name is Dominic. I am 38 years old. I run an architectural salvage and restoration company out of Cincinnati, Ohio, with my older brother Petros and our silent partner, who also happens to be our father Alexandros. We are third-generation Greek-American. We buy distressed historic buildings, restore them to something that respects what they were, and sell them to people who understand that a structure with 100 years of story in its bones is worth more than one built last Tuesday. It is niche work, it is personal work, and it reflects exactly how our family operates, because we do not throw away things that still have life in them. Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Hyde Park is not optional. It never has been. My mother Kalliope has made spanakopita from scratch every Sunday since before I was born. My father pours wine at exactly 6:15 regardless of who is or isn't seated. My brother Petros arrives with his wife Demi and their 2 kids and immediately takes over the television. My Aunt Helena has never once in her life waited to be invited before offering an opinion on something that is not her business. And my grandmother, Thea, who is 84 and still has the sharpest eyes in any room she enters, sits at the head of the table and watches everything with the quiet authority of a woman who has outlived everyone who ever underestimated her. That is the world I come from. So when I tell you that meeting Serena Whitmore felt like the first time I had ever genuinely been surprised by another person, I need you to understand the context. I don't fall fast. I don't fall without paying attention. I have been in 2 serious relationships in my adult life, both of which ended not with explosions, but with the quiet, honest acknowledgement that we wanted different things. I am a man who reads runes for a living, who assesses structural integrity as a professional practice, who has been taught since childhood that the foundation of something tells you more than the surface ever will. I met Serena at an architectural preservation conference in Columbus in late October of a year that started with every indication of being perfectly normal. She was presenting on adaptive reuse strategies for post-industrial commercial spaces. I was in the 3rd row because I had arrived late, and I remember thinking, within the first 90 seconds of her talk, that she was either genuinely brilliant or an extraordinarily convincing impersonation of brilliant. She was genuinely brilliant. We had dinner that night with a group from the conference. We talked for 4 hours. I drove home the next morning thinking about her the entire way, which for me, a man who uses long drives to mentally solve load-bearing wall problems, was entirely unprecedented. We dated long distance for 3 months before she relocated to Cincinnati for a position with a preservation nonprofit downtown. By month 5, she had met my family. By month 7, she knew which chair was my grandmother's and never sat in it. By month 9, Thea had taken to calling her the smart one as a primary identifier, which in our family is the highest possible endorsement. I proposed at the Overlook in Eden Park on a Thursday evening in late spring, just the 2 of us, no audience, because Serena had mentioned once in passing that she found public proposals slightly performative, and I had filed that information away and used it 11 months later. She said yes before I finished the sentence. My mother cried for 20 minutes when I called her. My father said, "Good. Bring her to dinner Sunday." Petros sent me a string of emojis that took me a full minute to decode. Thea, when informed the following day, simply nodded and said, "I know. I have been waiting for you to catch up." I was happy. Completely, honestly, embarrassingly happy. And I had absolutely no idea that the woman I had proposed to had built her entire present life on top of a story she had been telling so long she had almost convinced herself it was true. The first time Serena mentioned her family, we were 6 weeks into dating. It came up the way difficult things often come up early in a relationship, sideways, attached to something else, half-offered and waiting to see if you would reach for it. We were driving back from a restoration site in Dayton. She was in the passenger seat looking out the window at the flat Ohio landscape going dark in the early evening, and she said, almost to the glass, "You're lucky, you know, having the kind of family you have." I glanced at her. I know. Mine isn't like that. She said it simply, without drama, without the particular performance that people sometimes give, when they want you to ask follow-up questions. It sounded like a fact. My parents and I have been estranged for years. It was a necessary decision. They were controlling in ways that took me a long time to recognize, and even longer to get distance from. I don't talk about it much because there's not much to say that isn't just painful. I didn't push. I said I was sorry. She nodded, and we moved on to talking about the Dayton building's original pressed tin ceiling. What I didn't think about, because I had no reason to at the time, was whether it was true. Over the following months I came to understand something about Serena that I wish I had understood sooner, because it would have changed what I was looking for. She was not a cold person. She was not a cruel person in the way that word usually gets used. She was someone who had spent her 20s constructing a version of herself so carefully, so consistently, that the construction had become the only self she knew how to inhabit. She came from a small town in Indiana, and she had left it and built something entirely different in Cincinnati: a professional identity, a social circle, a particular kind of polish, and somewhere along the way the distance between where she started and where she had arrived became something she could not afford to let anyone see clearly. She didn't erase her parents because she hated them. She erased them because they were the most visible evidence of the gap. I didn't know any of that when I was falling in love with her. I know it now, and it does not change what happened. But it is the true thing, and I am interested in true things. My family received the information about her estranged parents with sympathy and without excessive pressure. My mother said that's so sad and made sure Serena always had a place at the table. My father asked once whether there was any chance of reconciliation, and when Serena said she didn't think so, he accepted that and moved on. Aunt Helena took slightly longer, redirected by my mother with the practiced efficiency of a woman who has been managing Helena's impulses for 40 years. The only one who kept returning to it, quietly and without announcement, was Via Thea. She never said anything direct. She would simply watch Serena from the head of the table, sometimes with an expression I couldn't fully read. Not suspicious, not unkind, just attentive. The way she watches things she hasn't yet decided what to make of. I noticed. I didn't act on it. Not then. The thing that eventually sent me to Millbrook, Indiana on a Tuesday morning in February wasn't suspicion. It was paperwork. Serena and I had been engaged for 4 months. We were in the process of updating our joint estate documents. My lawyer's suggestion, entirely standard when two people with separate business interests are preparing to merge their legal lives. Serena needed to provide her full legal name and a copy of her state-issued identification. I got the process folder on my desk the following morning. I opened it at around 8 in the morning with a cup of coffee and no particular expectations. The IT read, Serena Kathleen Aldrich, not Whitmore, Aldrich. Whitmore was her mother's maiden name, I would later learn. She had adopted it professionally sometime in her late 20s. Close enough to her real name to feel authentic, far enough to function as a curtain between where she came from and where she had arrived. I sat with that for a long time, long enough for the coffee to go cold. I told myself there were innocent explanations. A professional name, a personal preference, a privacy choice. People modify their names for all kinds of reasons. I knew that. I believed that. But I also knew that in 4 months of engagement and 11 months of dating before that, Serena had never once mentioned that Whitmore wasn't her birth name. And I am a man who notices the things people don't say as carefully as the things they do. That evening, from my home office with the door closed, I ran a quiet search on Serena Kathleen Aldrich. The name connected to an old address in a small town called Millbrook, Indiana. Population around 4,000, about 90 minutes northwest of Indianapolis. A property listing. A home on Carver Road. Current owners, Thomas and Beverly Aldrich. Her parents, alive. Present, still at the same address. I drove to Millbrook on a Tuesday. I told Serena I had a site assessment in Indianapolis. She kissed me goodbye and reminded me to text when I arrived. The drive gave me 90 minutes to construct every version of what I might find. Maybe Thomas and Beverly Aldrich were exactly what Serena had described, controlling people who had required distance for her own survival. Maybe I was about to drive 90 minutes to confirm everything she had told me and feel appropriately foolish for doubting her. I held that possibility carefully the entire way. I wanted it to be true. Millbrook was exactly what the name suggested. Small, tidy, the kind of town where the grain elevator is still the tallest structure, and people leave their cars unlocked in their own driveways. Carver Road was on the east edge of town, a quiet stretch of homes with mature trees, and the particular settled look of places where people have lived for a long time without any strong desire to leave. The Aldrich house was a craftsman-style bungalow with a deep front porch and a well-maintained garden that was currently dormant under February cold. A wind chime on the porch eave, a welcome mat, firewood stacked neatly along the sidewall. I sat in my car in front of that house for 5 full minutes. Then I got out, walked up the porch steps, and knocked. The woman who answered the door was in her mid-60s, slight, silver-streaked hair pulled back, with the kind of careful eyes that belong to people who have learned to read a situation quickly before deciding how much of themselves to show. She looked at me with those careful eyes and waited. "Mrs. Aldrich." I stopped, took a breath. "My name is Dominic Vasilakis. I'm engaged to your daughter Serena. I drove from Cincinnati this morning because I think we need to talk." The careful eyes held for one long moment. Then Beverly Aldrich pressed one hand flat against the doorframe, very quietly, as if she needed something solid to hold on to. She turned her head back into the house. "Tom." Her voice was completely steady. "Come to the door, please." Her knuckles against the doorframe were white. The inside of the Aldrich home was warm and full of Serena in the way that homes are full of their children, even decades after those children have left. School photos arranged along the hallway. A framed watercolor on the living room wall that Beverly told me Serena had painted in 7th grade. A graduation portrait on the mantel from Indiana State University, where Thomas stood beside her in his good sports coat, and Beverly wore the expression of someone trying to contain an emotion too large for a single face. These were not the faces of people who had caused damage and walked away from it. They were the faces of people who were still waiting at a door that had been closed on them. Thomas Aldrich was a retired high school shop teacher, 31 years in the Millbrook School District. Beverly had run a small bookkeeping service from their home for most of Serena's childhood and into her adult years. They had helped Serena through Indiana State. They had driven to Columbus when she got her first professional position and taken her to dinner at the nicest restaurant they could find in the city to celebrate. The rupture had come, Beverly told me, hands folded in her lap on the couch, voice carefully level, in the spring about 4 years ago. Serena had called from Cincinnati and announced she was being married. Not to me. Someone else, a man named Harrison. The relationship ended within a year, but in the telling of it, the wound had already been made. Because what Serena had told them was that she needed a proper wedding. That Harrison came from a prominent Cincinnati family. That she needed her parents to contribute significantly so that the event would reflect her professional standing. When Thomas and Beverly offered what they could, not a small amount for 2 people of their means, but not the number Serena had named, Serena told them that if they couldn't support her at the level she needed, she didn't have space for them in her life. And then she simply stopped answering. Beverly reached to the side table and picked up a small envelope. She held it for a moment before passing it across to me. A birthday card, Beverly's handwriting on the front, stamp return to sender in red, and in the return address field, Serena's handwriting, our Cincinnati address. She had written her own address on it and sent it back unopened. I looked at the card. I looked at Beverly's hands. I looked at Thomas sitting beside her with the particular stillness of a man who has spent 4 years building walls around something unbearable. Then I reached into my coat pocket and took out my phone. I opened the text Serena had sent me the previous evening, the one I had read before going to sleep, the one that had been sitting in the back of my mind, half-examined, since the moment I saw it. I turned the phone around and set it on the coffee table so Beverly could read it. Talked to my therapist today about my parents. I think I might be ready to have a limited introduction at some point before the wedding. Nothing heavy, just so your family doesn't feel like there's something strange about the silence. Maybe a lunch? I'll think about it more. Beverly, read it. Read it a second time. Then set the phone down with the gentleness of someone handling something already broken. Thomas looked at the phone from across the coffee table. Then he looked out the front window at the dormant garden. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. Beverly looked up at me. She's going to bring someone else. Not a question. Yes, I said. I think she is. Thomas asked, quietly, without anger, just needing the full picture. Who? I told them about the Hargrove family. Elliot and Maren Hargrove. Prominent Cincinnati philanthropists whose names appeared consistently alongside the preservation nonprofit where Serena worked. Elliot was a retired federal judge. Maren chaired 2 charitable boards. Precisely the kind of established Cincinnati family that would fill 2 chairs at a formal dinner and give the impression to anyone who didn't know better, that Serena Whitmore had come from exactly the world she now inhabited. I had noticed their names appearing in Serena's conversation about 3 weeks earlier. Casually, Elliot mentioned the zoning meeting. Marin thinks the gala venue is too formal. Brief, familiar, the linguistic groundwork of someone preparing you to accept a name before you have to believe in it. I had not understood what the groundwork was for until I sat in a craftsman bungalow on Carver Road and held a birthday card that had been mailed back without being opened. Thomas was looking at me when I finished. "What are you going to do?" I thought about my father in his good charcoal suit. I thought about Thea and her steady, patient eyes. I thought about the overlook in Eden Park and the word yes before I had even finished asking, and how it had felt like the realest thing that had ever happened to me. "I'm going to invite you to dinner," I said. I did not confront Serena that week. I want to be precise about that because the discipline of it mattered. I went home from Millbrook and had dinner with her and listened to her talk about a restoration project in Covington she was excited about, and I was present and warm and gave her no indication whatsoever that the ground beneath the entire structure of our life together had just shifted completely. I am my father's son. My father taught me that the moment before a revelation is the most important one, because how you handle it determines everything that comes after. He said, "Dominic, don't stop a lie in the middle. A half-told lie is just confusion. A fully told lie is a full accounting." I called my brother Petros the following day from my truck with the windows up. He listened without interrupting, which from Petros is a genuine act of effort, because he is not by nature a man who withholds responses. When I finished, there was a pause. "You're sure," he said. "Not a question, verification." I sat in her parents' kitchen, Pete. I held the birthday card. A breath. "What do you need from me?" "You and Demi at a dinner. Ma and Pop. On Helena to say absolutely nothing until I stand up to speak." A long pause. "I'll get the first 3. Alina's going to need a written contract. Tell her it's for me, she'll hold it." "Where's the dinner?" "Ithaki." He knew immediately what that meant. "When?" 2 weeks from Saturday. "And the Aldriches?" "They're driving from Millbrook." Another pause. The longest one. Then quietly, "All right, Dom, we'll be there. All of us." I spent the 2 weeks between that conversation and the dinner in a state of careful, sustained focus. The kind of professional detachment that serves you in high-stakes negotiations. Outwardly calm, inwardly running every scenario. I told Serena that my parents wanted to host an engagement dinner, that it was important to them culturally, that they needed to formally welcome the important people in her life before we stood in front of a priest. I told her to invite whoever she needed there to feel supported. She said she understood. Her smile had a specific quality, the smile of someone who has been waiting for exactly this invitation, and is relieved it has finally arrived. Within 3 days she mentioned the Hargroves. Casually, they had been so supportive, almost like family, really. Would that be appropriate, to include them? I said of course. I said I would love to meet them properly. She texted me that evening. They said yes. Elliot said it would be an honor. And below that, a single line. "I can't tell you how much this means to me, Dom. Having your family and mine together in the same room for the first time. This is everything." I read that message, set my phone face down on the desk, looked at my ceiling. She had almost certainly told the Hargroves something sympathetic and carefully constructed, that her biological family was gone, that Elliot and Marin had become the steady presence in her life, that this was simply a formalization of what already existed. She had found the version of events most likely to earn a yes from 2 decent, prominent people, and she had deployed it with precision. What she had not accounted for was that the foundation beneath the story had already been completely removed. I called my grandmother on the Thursday before the dinner. I don't know exactly why I needed to do that specifically. She is 84 and her hearing is not what it was, and our phone conversations are always slightly logistically complicated. But I needed to hear her voice. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said in Greek, which she does when the moment requires it, "Dominic, you know what your grandfather used to say about a table?" I said I didn't remember. He said a table is the most honest piece of furniture in any home, because everyone who sits at it has to sit at the same level. No one gets to be higher. A pause. Put the right people at the table, a gory moo. Let the table do the rest. I told her I would. Good. Another pause. And Dominic, you drive carefully. These February roads are terrible, and you go too fast. I told her I would be careful. You never listened, she said with affection and hung up. I went back to Millbrook the Saturday before the dinner. I called Thomas from the end of Carver Road, same as before. He opened the door before I was halfway up the porch steps. Beverly had made coffee. There were cookies on the table that hadn't been there the first time, and I understood immediately that she had prepared for my arrival. And something about that small domestic kindness, cookies on a plate for a man who had simply knocked on her door and told the truth, tightened something in my chest that I did not allow myself to examine too closely right then. I laid out the plan. The dinner at Ithaki 2 Saturdays from now, the private back room, my family, the Hargroves, whom Serena would invite believing this was her formal introduction of her honorary family to my parents, and them, Thomas and Beverly Aldrich, arriving after the dinner had started, after the performance was already in motion. Beverly's hands went still around her mug. I don't want a spectacle. It won't be, I told her. You walk in. You stand there. You don't need to say a word. The room will do the rest. Thomas was looking at the table. When he looked up, his eyes were wet and his jaw was set. The particular combination of a man holding something enormous with both hands. And afterward, what happens to her? I thought about it carefully. She will have to face a room full of people who now know the full truth. Her professional network, my family, the Hargroves, who she used to build this. What comes after that is hers to navigate. I'm not interested in punishment. I'm interested in honesty, and in making sure the right people are in the room. Beverly looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and briefly put her hand over mine, just for a second. Then she straightened in her chair. What time should we arrive? She asked. The night of the dinner arrived with the quality of a thing that has been building for a long time and is now simply here. Ithaki on a Saturday evening is warm in the specific way of places that have been feeding people well for a long time. Candles, low light, the smell of roasted lamb, and fresh bread meeting you at the door. The private back room had been set with care. White linen, good wine already open and breathing. A centerpiece of white and deep blue flowers my mother had chosen because, she said, they looked like honesty. I arrived early. My father was already there, standing near the window with a glass of water, radiating the focused calm of a man who has been fully briefed and made his peace with the situation. My mother was adjusting something on the table that didn't need adjusting, which is what she does when she is managing feelings she has decided not to display until the appropriate moment. She looked up when I walked in. She crossed the room and put both hands on my face, the gesture she has made since I was 4 years old when she needed my complete attention, and looked at me for a long moment without speaking. "You're sure this is how you want to do it?" she said. "Yes." "All right." She smoothed my collar. "Then we do it properly, like we do everything." Petros arrived with Demi. He shook my hand once, firmly, and said nothing, which from Petros communicated everything. Demi hugged me and said quietly, "Helena called me 4 times this week to confirm her instructions. So the no-talking rule has technically already been violated in spirit. But she is committed to tonight." Helena arrived 5 minutes later in her good coat, kissed me on both cheeks, and said through visibly gritted restraint, "I am saying nothing," which was itself something, but I appreciated the effort more than I can say. Thea was the last to arrive. She came in on Petros' arm and went directly to her chair at the head of the table. Because there is always a chair for my grandmother at the head, regardless of whose table it technically is, and sat down and looked around the room with those dark, patient eyes. She looked at me, she nodded once. That was all. Serena arrived at 7. She arrived the way she always arrived at places that mattered to her, composed, beautiful, every detail considered. Black dress, her grandmother's pearl earrings, Beverly's mother's pearls, I had learned in Millbrook, which she had carried forward without explanation, a thread she had kept even while cutting the others. The Hargroves came in behind her. Elliot Hargrove was in his early 70s, tall, silver-haired, with the careful bearing of a man who had spent decades controlling rooms by controlling himself. Maren was a few years younger, elegant, her expression warm and practiced in the way of someone who has attended many formal occasions and knows how to navigate them. They were precisely what Serena needed them to be, credible, prominent, above reproach. Serena moved through the room with the ease of someone who has prepared for this and prepared well. She greeted my parents warmly. She introduced the Hargroves as people who had been enormously important to her, like family, practically her people. She touched Maren's arm. She laughed at something Elliot said. She filled the room. She was extraordinary. Genuinely, technically extraordinary at this. I watched from beside my brother. I filled wine glasses. I made introductions. I laughed at the right moments. I was, by every visible measure, a man simply hosting a dinner that was going exactly as planned. My phone was in my inside jacket pocket. I had one text to send. I was waiting for exactly the right moment. It came at 7:42. The table had settled into the ease of a dinner that believes itself to be going well. The lamb had arrived. Elliot Hargrove was in the middle of a measured story about historic preservation law in Ohio, and Serena was listening with the relaxed expression of a woman who believes she is one. I stood up. I did not tap a glass. I simply stood, and the room settled the way rooms settle when the person who called the gathering rises to speak. I reached into my jacket and sent one word to Thomas Aldrich. Now. Then I put the phone away. My grandfather used to say that a table is the most honest piece of furniture in a home. I began, my voice steady, unhurried. Because everyone who sits at it has to sit at the same level. No one gets to be higher. I paused. My family takes a dinner like this seriously. Not as a formality, as a declaration. When we bring people to this table, we are saying, these people are real to us. These people belong here. We don't do that halfway. Serena was watching me with the full radiant smile of a woman who believes this is a love story being told about her. So I want to make sure tonight that the right people are at this table. All of them. I looked at the side door. Marco, the restaurant manager, had been briefed. He opened it on cue. Thomas and Beverly Aldrich walked through that door in their good clothes. Thomas in his navy blazer, the one Beverly had pressed twice in their Millbrook hotel room that afternoon. Beverly in a deep green dress with her hands folded in front of her, chin up, eyes moving immediately and directly to their daughter. Serena saw them. I was watching her face. I had positioned myself deliberately to watch her face. The color left it the way light leaves a room when the sun drops below the horizon. Not sudden, not dramatic, just complete. Her lips parted. Her right hand, resting near her wine glass, went absolutely still. Maren Hargrove looked at the door, then at Serena, then back at the door. Something moved across her face, a slow, quiet recognition, the expression of a woman who has just understood precisely how her kindness was used, and is deciding how she feels about that before she permits herself to feel it fully. Elliot Hargrove's expression shifted by approximately 2 degrees, barely visible, the expression of a former federal judge who has registered that something in this room is not what he understood it to be, and is now reassessing every prior conversation, with the efficiency of a man trained to do exactly that. Serena turned to me. Her eyes were doing the rapid, desperate calculation of someone searching for the angle. The version of this that can still be controlled. Dom. Her voice came out barely a voice at all. I drove to Millbrook, I said. Quietly. For her, not the room. 6 weeks ago. I drove out there on a Tuesday morning because I thought maybe I could give you something. I thought if your parents and I met, if I could show them who I was and explain what we were building, maybe I could bring them back to you before the wedding. I stopped, looked at her steadily. I found your father in the driveway. Beverly answered the door. I sat in their kitchen for 2 hours. I reached into my jacket and took out the birthday card. Beverly had given it to me to bring, because she had said, he should be the one to put it on the table, and I set it gently on the linen in front of Serena. I think you know what this is. Serena looked at the card. She didn't reach for it. Your father taught shop for 31 years, I continued, my voice still level. Your mother ran her business from home so she could be there when you came home from school. They drove to Columbus when you got your first job and took you to the nicest dinner they could find. They gave you what they could for a wedding. Genuinely gave it, Serena, from their retirement, and you told them if they couldn't meet a number, they didn't have a place in your life. I paused. And then you blocked them. And when their letters came to our address, you sent them back without opening them. The room held its breath. I turned to the Hargroves. I said their names with the respect they deserved, because they did deserve it. They had been used, not complicit, and there is an important difference. I believe she told you her parents were gone, that you'd become her people in that absence, that tonight was a formalization of something real. I paused. I imagine she made it feel true. She's very good at that. I looked toward the door. Those are her parents, Thomas and Beverly Aldrich, from Millbrook, Indiana. Alive. Present. They drove 90 minutes this afternoon because I called Thomas a week ago and told him his daughter needed him in the room, even if she didn't know it yet. Marin Hargrove looked at Elliot, a long look, not anger, something past anger. The look of two people who have built a life around genuine generosity and have just understood, with complete clarity, exactly how that generosity was converted into a prop. Elliot looked at Serena. He held the look for a measured moment, patient and sorrowful. Then he placed his napkin on the table and looked at Marin. She reached for her coat on the back of her chair. Before he turned to leave, Elliot looked back at me. He gave one brief, deliberate nod. The nod of a man who has assessed a situation and arrived at a conclusion and is acknowledging it without needing to put it into words. Then he rested his hand briefly at the small of Marin's back, and they walked toward the door. They did not look at Serena again on their way out. That, more than anything else that happened in that room, was its own form of consequence. Two people who had offered her something genuine, simply walking away from the wreckage of it without a word. She would carry that particular silence for a long time. I am certain of it. I turned back to Serena. She had stopped searching for an angle. There were none left. She was looking at me, and in her eyes I saw something I hadn't expected. Not defiance, not calculation, but something more unguarded than either. The expression of someone who has just watched the entire constructed architecture of their alternative life come down at once and is looking at the real one underneath it for the first time in a very long time. "You are extraordinarily good at this," I said. My voice was quiet. "What you built. How you held it together, how you managed every detail. I have never encountered that kind of sustained effort in my professional life, and I work in complex structural restoration." I paused. "But you built it on top of people. Real people who loved you and kept loving you through 4 years of silence and return cards and every Sunday that went by without a call." I reached into my jacket pocket. "I can't build a life on that foundation. I'm in the business of knowing what holds and what doesn't." I took the ring from my pocket. I set it on the linen beside the birthday card. Carefully, gently, the way you set something down when you have made your peace with it and you are ready to stop carrying it. Then I crossed the room. Thomas and Beverly Aldrich were still standing near the doorway. Thomas had his arm around Beverly's shoulders, both of them absorbing what they had just witnessed with the careful stillness of people who had prepared themselves for a difficult evening and received something they hadn't allowed themselves to hope for. I stopped in front of them. Beverly was holding herself together with the focused effort of a woman who has decided she will not cry in a restaurant. I respected that decision and did not test it. I reached back to the table behind me, the centerpiece flowers, white and deep blue, my mother's choice, and lifted them and held them out. Beverly looked at the flowers, looked at me. "I should have knocked on that door in October," I said. "I'm sorry it took me until February." Beverly Aldrich took the flowers, held them against her chest with both arms, and then, with the quiet totality of a person who has been holding something back for 4 years, she closed her eyes and put her forehead against her husband's shoulder. Thomas pressed his free hand over hers where she gripped the flowers. He looked at me over the top of her head. He extended his right hand. I shook it. He gripped hard and long, the grip of a man communicating something that required no words but also would not be abbreviated. My father appeared at my left shoulder. I don't know exactly when he moved. Alexandros Vasilakis operates on his own timeline and always arrives at the right moment. He looked at Thomas for a moment. Then he stepped forward and extended his hand. "Alexandros," he said, "I should have bought you a drink months ago. I'm sorry for the circumstances." Thomas shook his hand. Swallowed once. "Thomas, a breath. Your son did something decent here. Something I won't forget." My father looked at me, sidelong, just for a moment, while still holding Thomas' hand. The particular look that doesn't require a language between the two of us. My mother had already moved to Beverly, not a handshake. My mother does not shake hands when someone needs to be held. She pulled Beverly in with the complete, immediate warmth of a woman who has been feeding people at her table her entire life and understands precisely when someone needs to feel that they belong somewhere. Beverly held on. The flowers were still in her arms. Aunt Helena stood near the wall with her hands clasped in front of her and her jaw visibly tight with the effort of silence, and she held it. The complete and absolute silence she had promised me, for the only time in my living memory. Yediathea was still seated at the head of the table. When Thomas and Beverly were guided to seats, my mother had them at her side before another minute passed. My grandmother looked at them with those patient, steady eyes that have seen everything worth seeing. She looked at Thomas. She looked at Beverly. Then she nodded once, slowly. The nod of a woman confirming that something is what she believed it was. She looked at me across the table. Good, she said in Greek. Just that. Nothing else. We walked out of Ithaki a little after 9, my family, the Aldriches, a group that had not existed 2 weeks ago and now, in the specific way that real things come into being, simply was. The February air outside was cold and clean and smelled of the river somewhere behind the Cincinnati buildings. My father and Thomas were walking a few feet ahead, side by side, talking quietly, not the careful conversation of strangers, something easier than that already, something that happens when two men of a certain age and a certain kind of integrity recognize it in each other. My mother had Beverly's arm linked through hers. Petros and Demi flanked them. Aunt Halima had organized herself into the position of door holder and was taking that role with great seriousness. Yaya Thea moved slowly on my brother's arm and periodically made observations about the cold, the buildings, and the general inadequacy of February. I stopped on the sidewalk and looked back through the restaurant window for a moment. The private room was visible from the street. Serena was still inside, sitting at the center of the white linen table in her black dress. The ring on the cloth beside her, the birthday card beside the ring, the centerpiece gone. The room that had been full was now nearly empty. The colleagues she had invited had found reasons to leave. There was no one left to perform for. She wasn't performing anything. She was just sitting there in the honest quiet of a room that had finally told the truth, and for the first time in 2 years she looked like herself. Not the polished, constructed version, just herself. Tired and young and recognizable in the way that people become recognizable when everything they built around themselves falls away and there is nothing left but the original. I looked at her for a moment through the glass. I thought about a 7th grade watercolor on a living room wall in Millbrook. A woman pressing a navy blazer in a Dearborn hotel room that afternoon. A man who dropped a garden hose in a driveway and said his wife's name like a prayer. I thought about what it costs to decide that where you came from is something to be ashamed of. What it costs to maintain that decision for years, to build walls around it, to recruit good people into holding it up with you. I thought about how exhausting that must be. I thought about what she might do now that the walls were down. I didn't know, I still don't. But I knew what I was going to do. I was going to walk toward my family, on a sidewalk in Cincinnati in February, and be exactly where I was supposed to be. So I turned and walked toward them. Thomas and Beverly drove back to Millbrook that night. Beverly called my mother the following Thursday, which I know because my mother called me immediately afterward to report every detail of the conversation, including the fact that Beverly apparently also makes a version of Spanakopita, an Indiana church potluck edition, she had explained. And my mother received this information with the open-minded interest of a woman who believes that the spirit of a recipe matters more than any specific regional interpretation. She invited them to Sunday dinner in High Park the following month. Beverly said yes before my mother finished asking. Thomas called me on a Sunday morning 3 weeks after the dinner. Short call. He asked how I was doing. I told him I was all right. He said Beverly was well. Then he said quietly, she called us, Dom. Serena? Yeah. A pause. Didn't say much. Neither did we. But she called. I didn't say anything for a moment. I don't know what comes of it, he said. Maybe nothing. We'll see. Another pause shorter. But she called. That's something, Thomas. Yeah, he said. It is. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing particular, and then we hung up, and I sat in my truck in my driveway and looked at the February sky going gray over Cincinnati. I thought about structural integrity, about what holds and what doesn't, about the difference between a load-bearing wall and a decorative one, and how you can't always tell from the outside, and how eventually, one way or another, the truth of what a structure is built on makes itself known. I thought about a man in a navy blazer and a woman in a green dress walking through a restaurant door into a room that had been closed to them for 4 years. I thought about a table, the most honest piece of furniture in any home. My grandmother was right, as she tends to be about most things that matter. You put the right people at the table, and then you let the table do the rest.